The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. We are on to episode 111 of the Nerdcast Empire, episode 39 of Music Weekly. That means we are 3/4 of the way through a year of doing Music Weekly, which is pretty much insane at this point. Only 13 episodes until we will have completed a full year of music on the Nerdcast Empire. And we've got a great week of music, and when we get a chance to post a little bit later on, we'll post the playlist for this week. There's a lot of really great stuff that you can choose from this week because there were over 100 new releases on the list this week. So I think there's something for everybody, very literally, this week. Joining me in studio, as always, the man who puts it all together, Mike. Mike, how's it going?
Oh, it's going. Yeah, there was so much music this week. Did my best to get through all of it, which I gave it all the preliminary listen. Had a lot of stuff I liked. Really excited about my picks this week. Excited to actually go back and listen more to some of these other ones as well.
This was a challenging week to pick just two because, like I said, there were over 100, and there were a lot of really good ones, very solid bands, and it was kind of a challenge to narrow that down. But we, of course, do that because that's what we do on this podcast. But again, when we get a chance later on, when we get into our music segment, we'll post the Mike's playlist for this week, and I would encourage people to go through the whole thing because there's a lot of really great stuff this week, and really, really pleased with the music selection we had to choose from. Chris joining us in the chat as always. Sunday. It is that time once again as we are getting to the best rock and metal hits from October the 25th. That'll be coming up in our second segment of the podcast. Of course, we start off with news and notes and a couple of interesting news items this week. And the first one is based off a story on Blabbermouth from a member of Apocalyptica's band, Paavo Laihonen. That's I believe that's his name.
Yeah.
Of course, he's of the Finnish cello rockers, Apocalyptica. I think the important thing really is talking about the challenges of the music industry in 2024, because we talk a lot about how the ability to make music is now more accessible than ever. The computer tools that are available. We have seen countless numbers of solo albums that have been produced during our time doing this music podcast, where you have one musician that basically does an entire album without any other input from any other musician. But the one thing Paavo kind of mentions in this article, which is really kind of interesting, is because it is so easy now to produce music, it's also a lot harder to stand out. And he mentions in here, and I'll get Mike's thoughts on this, that Spotify releases 140,000 songs every day. So how do you find a way as a band to make your new song or your new album stand out when there are just so many out there? And obviously, I would say it's fair to say we didn't even realize the quantity and quality of music that was being produced out there until we started doing this podcast. But this was a really interesting read because it kind of talks about, the challenges of these new bands. And even if you're really, really good, like, how do you find a way to get that break to make it something you can actually make a living out of?
Yeah, it's funny reading the article. It first mentions that he was asked about the relevance of exploring gatekeeping in music communities in today's digital age. And to me, it was like, what gate? Like, they're just trying to find a gate at this point.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The way I see it now, it's almost as if creating music is no different than being just any other online content creator or influencer. You essentially are just trying to build that following on your own and hope that you can build relationships enough where these people want to buy, whatever deluxe edition, physical media or digital media that you release. And I'm kind of curious, because he mentions too about touring and how they had to basically get a lot of the things for free in order to actually put on their shows initially, and how do you do that nowadays? I'm curious for some of these up-and-coming acts, like how lucrative even is touring at any large capacity?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before that these bands that do kind of the festival-type tours almost never make money off of it because you're splitting a very small pie many, many ways. And, of course, the big bands that are at the end of that festival are the ones that are getting most of the pie, and you're lucky if you even cover your expenses for the weekend. But if you're doing small venues, I can remember seeing shows at the Mad Frog down in Clifton near University of Cincinnati, and just thinking, even venues that are a little bigger like Bogart's or the Taft Theater, how are those bands really coming out ahead? Especially because if you are going to play a bigger venue like Bogart's, Taft, whatever it may be, you're probably going to have to be on a bill with a bigger band that, again, is going to take a lot of that money. So, again, how do you find a way to make touring worth it? Because you need to tour, you need to get out there, you need to meet people, you need to build relationships. I mean, it's the same thing we talk about on this podcast. Like, we're trying to get our stuff out there. We're trying to get discovered, if you will, get that break that kind of brings in an audience and as people find us. And it's not easy. And if you're a band that has so much more in the way of expenses than a podcast does, I just have to think the challenge becomes even exponentially harder.
Yeah, I think the new record label or record label exec is actually just an algorithm now. Like, you hope to get caught up in whatever platform you're on's algorithm to get you in front of as many eyes and ears as possible. And I think something like touring, if you're going to do it, it's more about the networking of it. It's more about getting to know other bands that are doing similar things to you, kind of growing a community and creating more buzz ultimately online so people can find your product.
Yeah, for sure. And it's impressive how many great bands there are out there. We see them every week. There was, a couple dozen really good releases this week.
Yeah.
And you go to their YouTube music page, and some of them have 15, 20 listens per song. And it's this is a band that we were able to find and we were able to listen to, and then you pull up their YouTube page, and it's we're one of maybe 20 or 25 people that have listened to this album, and it's really good. And it's why does this band have 25 people? And then we'll click on the next band and they've got 30,000 people that have listened to these songs, or 700,000 people. It's, some of it obviously is longevity and name recognition, but some of it just does seem to be the luck of the YouTube / Twitch / whatever Spotify draw that you happen to get thrown in front of the right people at the right time.
It also makes you wonder, too, from a label standpoint, what their business models are, because clearly we see several different class of record label. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got your big hitters, your Nuclear Blast, your Metal Blade. I would say probably Frontiers at this point, just given their vast roster. But then you see something like Wormhole Death, where it seems like they're kind of snatching up a lot of bands that have just released things digitally and re-releasing their work, but probably not to a huge audience. Dying Victims is another one. Let's see, A Rising Empire. Things like labels that we're seeing more and more of, but I'm kind of curious what their deals are with the bands and how they work about kind of getting them out there and promoted, because I would not have heard of most of these had we not started doing this.
Well, and that's not even to mention the next class, which is these bands that are basically just on Bandcamp, and they're kind of
basically self-labeled.
Yeah, and then they're doing it themselves, and it's kind of amazing when a band can get out of that and actually make a living out of it, because you're basically doing it all, other than Bandcamp providing you the platform to do it, but it's...
At least with that, the cut that Bandcamp's always getting, and you're not going to, none of your proceeds are just going to disappear.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to find out later that you're not getting the money you thought you were getting. Like the DIY Bandcamp model, at the very least, is basic.
Yeah, and it gives you cost certainty, which certainly these bands that aren't making a lot of money need. But a really interesting article, and something that is kind of a good reminder that as we go through this podcast each and every week, that if you hear something you like, or you see something on one of these playlists, please buy their albums, buy their merch, see them when they're on tour, because that's the only way these bands, a lot of them that we talk about, can continue to do this. And we certainly always encourage you to see them live, because there's nothing like live music. But if you can buy merch, if you can buy their albums, do that, because that will help them keep going. Speaking of keeping going, our second news story is about the band Foreigner, and this is another blabbermouth story. It's an interview with Foreigner bassist Jeff Pilson, addressing that it may be a forever ending tour for Foreigner, because they may continue to tour even beyond 2025. Obviously, just inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but a band that no longer has any of their original members. They've got some members that have been around for a while, but with Mick Jones stepping off the road, they're basically a new band so to speak, that's playing under the Foreigner name, and that's something we've talked about a lot, about how people kind of feel about that. And then, I know you'll mention that Eddie Trunk just posted a post talking about Lou Gramm is still out there and singing and evidently sounding great at his age. So I guess interesting to see if Foreigner keeps it up. Is seeing a band that doesn't have its original members but is playing all the classic music, like, is that a draw for people? And I'm kind of curious your thoughts about whether Lou Gramm will ever come back to the band.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Checking out the video that Eddie Trunk posted, he did sound really good, and I seem to feel like a few years back that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah.
So I don't know if his health is now where it needs to be, and he's whatever he was dealing with, he's now through and is sounding like himself, which is pretty fantastic. I think as far as they're just a cover band, which Jeff Pilson understands where people's coming from when they make that criticism, but says that the ticket sales speak for themselves, and
Sure.
ultimately it's the music that is the legacy, not any individual member of the band. I think it's easy to say that when the quote-unquote cover band in question has people that have already proven their legitimacy in the hard rock world. I mean, obviously Jeff Pilson, he's been with Foreigner since 2004, but before that, obviously the longtime bassist for Dokken.
Yeah.
He's played with Macaulay Schenker Group and Dio. Like, there's no question that you would pay to see that guy play music. That guy's a proven commodity. Same with Kelly Hansen, just a tremendous vocalist who sang for Hurricane, among other bands. He's been with Foreigner since 2005.
Yeah.
Another artist that's with them right now, Chris Frazier on drums. He toured with Steve Vai from 1985 to 2001. Toured with Eddie Money, played with Whitesnake, Tak Matsumoto Group, and he's been with Foreigner now for 12 years. So, is it the original members? No, but you're getting a top-notch experience when you have musicians of that caliber playing the music.
And the interesting note that is mentioned farther in the article, and I kind of bring it back up with Gramm, is that there are discussions, I guess, to include Gramm as Foreigner moves towards its 50th anniversary in 2026, which, again, doesn't sound like a band that's ready to hang it up anytime soon. They're just going to continue to tour.
And they have had other classic members join them
Yes.
occasionally on select shows as well, so it's not unheard of, and if their relationship with Gramm is good, that's fantastic.
And I guess, if the band kind of gives its blessing, the original band members, at least most of them, because I don't know that you can get any total band to agree on anything, but if these guys are coming back and clearly like, hey, this is Foreigner now, like, we're okay with this.
Yeah.
And like you said, an incredibly talented group that, and the other thing too is, unlike some of these bands where we talk about use of AI or these weird shows they're trying to concoct, Foreigner is not hiding any of this. If you know who you're going to go see when you buy the tickets, and like they said, the ticket purchases speak for themselves. People still want to see this Foreigner. They continue to do really well to the point, like, why would they stop touring anytime soon? Because most of their current members are young enough that they could tour for quite a while longer.
For sure. And I guess really now when we think about this situation and other bands facing the situation, you have to ask yourself, kind of like to his point, maybe it's just a matter of the music doesn't stand up as well as Foreigners, where maybe that's why people complain about it being a cover band, because they're not as interested in just the music.
Yeah, it could be. And I guess that's something on a case-by-case basis when we judge these bands that are, people are trying to keep them going when in reality maybe they should be let go. But Foreigner, obviously a great band, and it's kind of cool to see them continue on. And who knows, maybe we get a new album somewhere down the road. If they're continuing on, it'd be kind of cool to see them produce something new. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that. One last story today, and I knew this would be one that Mike would have an interesting perspective on, so I definitely wanted to kind of get his thoughts. The celebration by Megadeth of their 30th anniversary of the first ever band website and euthanasia album. The website was basically established as Megadeth Arizona, the first ever band website on the internet, in a time where the internet was certainly not what we know it to be today. And it's really interesting. The story also includes a Q&A with Dave Mustaine that talks about how recently he's done like a Q&A on Discord to kind of like talk about kind of take people back to when he was able to do the Q&A on these message boards back in the day when they first started this website. But as a longtime Megadeth fan, like, it's kind of crazy to see this come up. And I know you posted a screenshot in our Discord, and it's kind of wild to see what that looked like in the early or the mid 90s, I guess.
Yeah, and you can still take a look at it, MegadethArizona.com. Like, it's still up in some form. It's kind of rough to look at because clearly it wasn't built with modern browsers and resolutions in mind. If you go to Megadeth's actual website, there is kind of a recreated version of it on the front screen to kind of give you a more accurate portrayal of what it probably looked like in 1995 or 96. Yeah, I remember this. I remember ads for it. I remember back then just being on the internet and just typing in the name of a band.com just to see if they had a website.
Yeah.
Like things were so rudimentary back then. But yeah, my memories of this too take me back to even like post Cryptic Writings when I was just waiting to hear like snippets of what would be the next album, Risk, to arrive online. And I seem to recall there being like little Real Player audio of snippets, and it's amazing how far we've come. And in a way I kind of miss the old internet because there's just something so unknown and bizarre about it. But Megadeth is always that one of their monikers was always kind of like, the world's state-of-the-art speed metal band. That was a thing that they kind of embraced. So you see this, and it's not always for the best. I mean, this thing's really cool, but that being said, more recently, Dave Mustaine kind of getting into the whole NFT thing there for a while. Like,
yeah, they don't always work out.
Yeah,
as it turns out.
it's not always lucrative, not always well advised, but it's really cool.
Yeah, they've always kind of been ahead of their time, which is part of the reason why they're such a fun band to follow along with. Like you said, sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't worked out, but really cool, and it does give you a little bit of a glance for those who maybe are younger that listen to this podcast and don't remember what the early days of the internet, back in the days of Prodigy and stuff like that. I remember ESPN.net on Prodigy, and obviously when I went to OU in '97, like getting like high speed internet, whatever that was in '97, which I'm sure was not great, but it was great compared to the dial up we had here at home. It was like a whole world opened up of craziness. And
I just love on Megadeth Arizona's website, when you go to like the far right, there's like the Megabyte News. It's like, new tour dates. Megadeth will be joining Motley Crue on the Maximum Rock 2000 tour.
Nice.
Which I saw. Buy tickets online before everyone else. Where does that go to? I wonder.
I'm going to get a virus on your computer.
Download your own Megadeth hotbar.
Oh, man. The old hotbar.
Only for Windows operating systems with Microsoft Internet Explorer 4.5 or higher.
Ooh.
Visit MegadethDirect.com for all your Megadeth gear. Enter to win tickets to see Megadeth on the Maximum Rock Tour. Find out more about Risk, the latest album. It's so hilarious. But, yeah, this was the future.
It was. The future is back, but definitely worth looking into if you're a fan of nostalgia. Even if you're not a fan of Megadeth, I think you'll find a good trip on this Megadeth Arizona site, or you can just go to their website and kind of see what a modern recreation of that would look like. So really cool. Just one of those stories that kind of made sense to bring up when we think of the fond times of Real Player and Winamp.
The one thing that I clicked that was talking about like how strong of an internet connection you had. Like, if you have a 28.8 modem, your audio will sound like AM radio.
Yeah, it sure will, man. That was always the worst. Like, you just sound like you were listening to it at the end of a can. Like, why do I listen? And I listened to internet radio at that wavelength for many years because that was what we had. Now we're complaining because Spectrum can't even stay online for a full day without crashing, but I still have insane internet speeds. Like,
I still wonder too, and I didn't think about it back then because we were all kind of ignorant to the whole thing. Like, what kind of resolution were the videos on Real Player?
Bad.
So bad.
Bad. I can only imagine.
So bad.
Maybe it's somewhere down the road. If people are interested, we should do like an old nostalgia episode where we talk about the technology of 2000 or whatever.
You watch us on Shoutcast. Your Winamp player.
For sure. Winamp's still great. That's
do miss me some Winamp.
That's classic. Just great memories for sure. But that wraps up our news segment. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. You can listen to previous episodes of the Nerdcast Empire, all 110 of them before today. You can visit our store while you're there, get your Nerdcast Empire merch. We will not have a midweek show this week. I'm going to be broadcasting like every day this week. If you have ESPN Plus, you'll probably find me there somewhere just about every day this week. We'll be back on next Sunday with the next episode of Music Weekly. And I believe we're on to November 1st next week.
That we are.
So we are into the month of November. So make sure you check us out next Sunday, 7 o'clock Eastern Time on the Nerdcast Empire. It's time to get to our music segment. And, of course, just a reminder that if you are listening on the podcast version of this podcast, then you will not hear the music clips. So you're going to want to check us out live every Sunday night on twitch.tv/nerdcastempire or check out the VOD on YouTube. In most cases, everything gets through there, unless you're in some remote part of the world. And I'll also post a link when Mike gets to his first band in the card section that will allow you to go straight to Mike's playlist, which has just been posted in the chat as well. A lot of good stuff this week. It was a week that there was far too much good music this week. We're going to probably have a week coming up that we're going to wish we had some of these bands, especially with the holidays coming up. I have a feeling that some of our releases may get a little thin over the holidays. We'll see. I don't know how that's going to work out. But as always, Mike pulls the list. We go through. We pick two bands each. This is the music of October the 25th. And then coming up in the final segment of the show, we'll go into the vault and talk about a couple of classic albums you should own here on the Nerdcast Empire. But it's time to get to the new stuff. And Mike, I will let you kick things off. As always, you got two picks. Here's your first one. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this first one. I've listened to this album several times now, including on my trip to the mall in Beaver Creek for Anime Day over the weekend. This is the sixth full-length album from the Finnish metalcore band. The band is One Morning Left, and the album is Neon Inferno.
This was something. I think that's the best thing I can say leading into your conversation about this, because this was definitely entertaining for sure.
Yeah, this band's wild. Wikipedia also labels them as electronicore and post-hardcore. Electronicore, I'd not heard that term before, but it probably fits. If I was going to have to describe them, I would say it's metalcore, but like party metalcore.
Yeah.
A mixture of electronic, metalcore, glam, power metal, just such a weird infusion of everything, but kind of at its heart, it's like maybe Andrew WK doing metalcore music, I guess. Band consists of Mika Lottie on dirty vocals, Yuso Turkey on guitar and backing vocals, Levi Luoto on guitar and clean vocals, Miska Sipalainen on bass guitar and backing vocals, Toko Kapila on keyboards and synthesizers, and Dennis Hallback on drums. My introduction to this band was the track that I had on the playlist, Neon Inferno Paradise. It has the band performing in what looks like a laser tag venue. Really kind of strange, but it fits so well with the synths that are in the song. When the clean vocals kicked in the first time to complement the harsh vocals, I knew this was something that I needed to listen to it in its entirety. And that's kind of the whole album. It's just crazy synth parts, harsh vocals, clean vocals, just bombast all over the place. I could list standout tracks, and I will, but you really kind of have to experience the entire album. Tracks that are really notable would be like Emerald Dragon, Tonight, Neon Inferno, Paradise, Reunion, Summer Lovin', which they have the original version and a remix, both worth listening to. One song that they have a video to that I think is a must-watch is Michael the Knight. Appears to be some sort of tribute, I guess, to Knight Rider. It's really absurd, but the song is tremendous. They also have a cover of Michael Jackson's Beat It, which is tremendous as well. The track that I picked to listen to this evening is the title track, Neon Inferno Paradise.
So let's check that out. This is One Morning Left with the album Neon Inferno, and this is Neon Inferno Paradise, the song that Mike has picked for this week. Let's check it out. Yeah, these guys are different for sure, but in a good way. Like that video you sent, the one you mentioned, Michael the Knight. That was out there, but you appreciate the creativity. It's one thing to have just a great sound like these guys do, but then to also have the creativity to put together a video like that and somehow make it all make sense. Like this was definitely, it was one that was, I listened to the song on the track and I was like, oh, this is pretty good, but yeah, these guys definitely have a unique sound that I think a lot of people are going to dig.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to see what kind of following they currently have, because this, to me, is some of the best modern metal being made right now. I'm super excited to have found it, and definitely will look into the rest of their catalog.
Definitely check out One Morning Left. Certainly a very strong contender when we get to year-end lists as far as one of the better releases of 2024. Of course, you had to pick a second pick to try to live up to that, but you've got a really excellent second pick to follow that up. What do you got for us?
Yeah, so for my second pick, I'm always a fan of anything that's just kind of classic heavy metal, and that's what these guys are. It's also, I believe, the first time I've run into a metal band from Slovenia. The band in question is Challenger, and this is their debut album, Force of Nature.
Yeah, this was another one that I marked pretty early. I really dug the song on the playlist. Didn't get a chance to get back to it. By the time I did, you had mentioned you were picking a band from Slovenia, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I know you're picking that one, but I definitely want to go back and listen to this whole album because what I've heard is really good.
Yeah, it's a really solid album. It's like I said, their debut album following an EP that came out in 2019. Band's been around since 2016. Consists of Tony Plesko on drums, Urban Zeleznik on drums, Jakub Regic on vocals and guitars, and Samo Stopar on bass. Looking them up, I found their Facebook, which has an intro reading, Challengers siphon off both the best and most idiosyncratic strains of heavy metal legends' DNA and reconfigure them into a travel log of pathos and bravado.
That's saying a lot.
That's a statement. That is a statement. It's just another great band that we've encountered now on the Dying Victims roster of their record label. Other bands that we've mentioned in the past on that label include Hexstar, Mean Mistreater, and Toxicool. This album is everything you like about classic metal. If this band started in 1981, this is what you think they would sound like, only with a much higher production value, because a lot of those albums back then didn't quite enjoy that. You definitely hear Iron Maiden and Saxon in their delivery. It's a band that, for me personally, it's like I tend to kind of lament the fact that I wasn't around when like the new wave of British heavy metal and thrash metal kind of spawned and became the thing it became. So it's really cool when you discover bands like this that are modern, current bands that are still kind of keeping the spirit alive and fresh. Standout tracks on the album include Imperial Madness, Victims of War, Exhausted Earth, The Final Epoch, and the track that I picked for sampling tonight, the title track, Force of Nature.
So let's check that out now. This is Challenger from Force of Nature. It is the title track of the album Force of Nature. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. One thing, that happens a lot when we play these songs for the podcast is you really get the chance to hear the songs in multiple channels. For whatever reason, sometimes the YouTube videos, I don't know if they just flatten them out, but you don't really notice it as much. But when we play it on like YouTube Music or Apple Music, you really get to hear like the dynamic channel mix, and it really adds something to it. Like clearly they've spent some time thinking about how they want to split the guitars off and how they want to split the drums off, so that you're hearing it really in surround, and I think it adds to that. But again, this is a band that easily could have been from the early 80s and not one that's releasing this album now. They've got a really cool album cover that you should check out. Again, also kind of fits in with the whole vibe. Looks like an album cover that would have come from the early 80s, but really, again, it's great to see so many of these bands, at the very least, influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal, or in some cases, trying to keep the spirit of that alive. And it's kind of the new wave of British heavy metal in some ways, and these guys really do a great job of bringing it to you.
And I think, we talk about it somewhat regularly when we pick the albums we do for each week, the album artwork that's used, and we don't really consider how much thought goes into that, because you got to think that is kind of a driver of vinyl sales.
Yeah, for sure.
Just having that piece that you can display that has this fairly large work of art on it, essentially. When it was CDs or cassettes, maybe that wasn't such a big deal, discerning it from digital purchases. But with vinyl coming back, I think that's got to be something you think pretty seriously about.
And I think the bands that are still very clearly using artists to create those, as opposed to like throwing them into ChatGPT and generating an album, to me, they earn extra bonus points, because if I'm going to buy an album, I want to buy something that somebody created, because that's just adding to it, and you're not just getting something generic that a computer spit out. And those guys certainly look like they've hired, or maybe they drew it themselves, an album cover that is...
Somebody put some work into that.
Yeah, for sure.
When you think of the classic metal albums, you think of Maiden, you think of Priest, you think of Megadeth, just such iconic album covers. I think that's something that, as you're writing songs and putting together that album, in the back of your mind, you're already visualizing, hey, this is what I want this thing to look like. And again, now that people are buying it to display, becomes an important decision.
No question. But the music's great as well, so definitely check out Challenger, Mike's second pick for this week. I've got 2 picks as well this week, and I tried my best to avoid picking the band that was on the Frontiers record label again this week, but I couldn't really avoid it, and I think it's going to be pretty obvious why. The Frontiers band this week is a band called Cassandra's Crossing, and the album is Garden of Earthly Delights. It's not as much a band as it is a combination between Cassandra Carson of the band Paralandra and George Lynch, the legend who seems to get involved in a new project at least every other week. I think we've featured him about 6 times already on this podcast in some shape or form, and here he is again, and this is awesome. Like and it sounds like a George Lynch album. Like, it just sounds like an album that he would play on. Another thing that really drew me to it is it's not just straight AOR rock, which a lot of the Frontier stuff can be. It's almost bluesy rock. There are some like hard rock parts as well, but it's just a great rock album, and I hope that this is not the last time these two collaborate on something, because I would definitely love to hear more from these two. If you're a fan of George Lynch, if you're a fan of Cassandra Carson, I think you're going to really dig this entire album. Standout tracks include Impatient, Closer to Heaven, Devastating Times, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is Stranger. So let's check this out now. It's the first track on Cassandra Crossing, Garden of Earthly Delights. It is Stranger. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. Yeah, I mean, other than the weird pause there, I'm not sure what happened there in the middle of the song. That's certainly not supposed to be there, but, there's not really much more I can say other than the fact that it just immediately sounds like a George Lynch album. The moment you put it on, that's the first track, and you just jump right into the deep end, and it's just really excellent from there. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, when I first started listening to this, the second his guitar picked up, and I'm thinking, this is Dokken. Like, Don Dokken's going to start singing at any moment. Instead, we get Casandra Carson, who, we've mentioned her band Paralandra previously. Their album was featured on the episode covering April 5th music. So, not new to the podcast by any means. Great vocalist. I think just kind of that modern female rock singer. It's not symphonic. It's not power. It's just straight up rock vocals, and she nails it. Definitely something I can go back and listen to even more. Always a big fan of George Lynch. He's one of those guys that I feel like Frontier Records has given people the opportunity to really appreciate him as the guitarist he is. I always kind of feel like with Dokken's inclusion within the hair metal sphere, he maybe didn't always get the respect he deserved as a tremendous guitarist, but guy's incredible.
Yeah, and like I said, he's been involved with about 4 or 5 other Frontiers projects. The list just continues to grow. So who knows? Maybe sometime in the next few weeks we'll see another album come up that he's got a hand in. But
would not surprise me.
And this was really, really good. I definitely encourage everybody, if you're a fan of either one of those bands or just a fan of great hard rock music, definitely check out Cassandra's Crossing. My second choice this week, because I couldn't get away from AOR completely, was an AOR band, but it is not a Frontiers band. This is the band Daytona with the album Garder La Flamme. This is a hard rock band from Sweden. This is their debut album, fronted by Frederick Werner, who comes your way from Osakaru and Air Raid. He's been backed by musicians from the bands Misbehavior, Eclipse, and Timescape, included Eric Heinke on guitar, Nicholas Lindblom on bass, Johan Berlin on keyboard, and Kylie Larson on drums. Clearly, the point of this album was to do an 80s-sounding AOR album, and they really nailed it. Clearly, this music is incredibly popular in Europe, but specifically in Sweden. Feels like we get a lot of the AOR bands coming from that part of the world, but they do such a great job, and it again, just is like a time capsule. Take you back to a time in the mid-'80s. You're going to hear kind of the whole range of what this sounds like. I mean, there were even times I kind of equated it to maybe some of Richard Marx's hardest music at time, but there was also just more of a general AOR sound as well, but really enjoyed it. Standout tracks include Downtown, Where Do We Lose the Love, Welcome to the Real World, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast, Slave to the Rhythm. So we're going to check out Daytona and Garder La Flamme. This is the 8th track off of that album. It is Slave to the Rhythm, so let's check out a little bit of that now.
Of thunder. Nothing's gonna break the spell I'm under. Don't wake me up. I'm a slave to the rhythm till the breaking of the day. I can't shake it up. No matter how I try, I'm just a slave to the rhythm. Yeah. I'm so addicted to it. Are you addicted to it?
I mean, it's just, again, you like just classic 80s sounding synth rock. Like, this is pretty much what you're looking for here with Daytona. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the Richard Marx comparison is kind of spot on. Like, the vocalist even kind of sounds like him on occasion. I'm fascinated with the popularity of this music over there. And if I were to ever have to soundtrack an 80s movie, I know where to go to get modern artists that could do that sound justice. I just, Finland's been killing it with metal lately. Sweden, they pretty much have that melodic AOR rock music on lock.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, the stuff that we're getting out of there. It's all been really enjoyable, and great to see somebody kind of keeping that music alive. So definitely check out Daytona. Really enjoyed this album. It's, again, another great time capsule into 80s synth rock. That's going to do it for our new music this week. It's time to check out The Vault, where Mike and I will each give you an album that you should check out. Mike is going through the list of Wikipedia's glam bands, A to Z, picking a band each week that qualifies, and We're up to the letter L, and that really opened the door for a lot of different great possibilities. But you've picked a really good album this week.
Yeah, there were quite a few options in the letter L. I could have gone with LA Guns, but I'm actually more familiar with their work than a lot of these other bands, so I steer clear of that. The band Lion was on there, whom I really only know from performing the Transformers theme in the 1986 animated Transformers movie, which was amazing. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But I went away from that. I ended up settling on the band Lillian Axe, and we are talking about today their second album from 1989. The album is Love and War.
I listened to this album today. I'm just kind of dumbfounded as to why this band didn't have hit songs off of this album, because this was really, really good.
Yeah, I was kind of blown away by this album too. The band itself started under the name Oz until Steve Blaze joined and ultimately became the lead guitarist of the band. He proposed changing the name to Lillian Axe after seeing the movie Creepshow. There was a scene where there's a skeleton in a bridesmaid dress floating in a window, and for some reason that made him think the name Lillian, because it sounds like a creepy old lady's name, and added Axe to it just to complete the name. I'm still curious if this wasn't somehow a reference to the band Molly Hatchet, because I think Lillian Axe, Molly Hatchet,
They should be touring together.
Yeah, they didn't mention it, but I kind of feel like, female name and, one-handed bladed axe-like weapon. I don't know. That was my thought.
I wish they would have been as successful as Molly Hatchet.
Yeah. I
Sure, they do
wouldn't
too.
mind seeing either of them, though. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Band caught the attention of Rat's management and ultimately signed with MCA, with Rat's Robin Crosby producing their first album. Sadly, both their first and second album didn't really meet a lot of commercial success, and they were dropped by the label. Good news, this band they are not was, they are still around. They've continued to release music since then. Several lineup changes, but are still going on to this day. I checked setlist.fm, and they've been touring Western U.S. and Canada just this month, so still out there getting it done. They only have two original members left, Steve Blaze on guitar, which he seems to kind of be the band leader to begin with, and also bassist Michael Max Darby. Love and War itself was produced by Tony Platt, who worked on albums for artists like AC/DC, Cheap Trick, Bob Marley, Buddy Guy, Foreigner, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. Seemed like a rare one to throw in there. Motorhead and Testament. So might explain why the album sounds so well produced.
Yeah, for sure.
To me, this album, it's solid. It sounds like really, really well polished, sleazy AOR music. If I had to try to explain it. Ron Taylor's vocals fit really well with that era of rock. He can kind of do the sleazy vocals, but within a more well-polished sound, it still fits really well. Undoubtedly, Steve Blaze is a great songwriter, great guitarist, and like you mentioned, really shocked that these guys didn't find more success, considering their second album came out in '89, first album in '88, that there was time there before kind of the floor dropped on pop metal and hair metal. They did release a box set last year, which includes their first 7 albums. You can get it on Amazon for about $50.
Oh, that's a good deal.
Not a bad deal for 7 albums. Standout tracks on this include All's Fair in Love and War, She Likes It on Top, Diana, The World Stopped Turning, Ghosts of Winter, Show a Little Love, and Letters in the Rain. The whole album is really good and certainly underrated in terms of that kind of music.
I think the thing that was most interesting to me, on top of the fact that it was really good and I'd never heard of these people until you told me you were picking them, was the fact that typically the bands that do the sleaze rock, especially in that era, were kind of exclusive to it. Like, if we did sleaze rock, everything was sleaze rock. The presentation was sleaze rock, the sound. There were a couple of songs on here that really sounded like they fit in that sleaze rock, but there were also a lot of songs that just sounded like straight up AOR, polished rock and roll that should have been hits even outside of people who maybe didn't like the sleaze rock of that time. Like, this was just really good. And again, it's, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because, we come across these bands every week that do this great music and you wonder how many of them will make it. But at a time where this type of music was popular and clearly somebody saw something in these guys to sign them to a label, it's kind of amazing that there wasn't at least one or two hits off of this album that could have maybe propelled this band to at least a little more of a bigger stardom before the glam metal scene kind of dried up in the early 90s.
Yeah, it's funny. I seem to recall, and I was looking it up again to kind of verify that on the Wikipedia page, it kind of pointed out that when MCA showed interest in the band, they really wanted to sign Steve, since he was the guy who wrote all the songs and owned the name. And clearly this guy was the front runner of the band as lead guitarist and songwriter. And yeah, I still don't understand how none of these songs charted or were bigger hits than what they were, because as far as hard rock music in 1989, this is right up there with the best stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're a fan of the music we spotlight on this podcast, I think you'll do really well to go back and check out Lillian Axe, especially this album, Love and War. I think you're going to find a lot of the same type of music that we spotlight each and every week spotlighted in that album. But really good stuff. Definitely worth checking out. So we're getting to my pick in the vault, which was 2003 now. We started many, many weeks ago. Back the first year we picked was 1969. It was the Chicago Transit Authority, their debut album. Of course, the band went on to become Chicago, and now we are up to 2003. We're going to continue this again until we get to 2010, and then we're going to jump into something else at that point. But we still got some interesting times in 2003 because we're still seeing some bands from the 90s that are continuing to release music. We're seeing older bands that maybe had a resurgence in touring in the early 2000s come back and release a new album. And obviously, you're also seeing bands that are going to be big into the late 2000s getting started in 2003. A few honorable mentions. A couple of Japanese bands make the honorable mentions this week. The album Many Pieces is the fifth album from Japanese pop rock group Every Little Thing. Worth mentioning because it includes the song Grip, which of course was used as the fourth opening theme to Inuyasha.
Great opening theme.
Great opening theme. Was the fifth single off of this album, as it turns out, released in 2003. So definitely worth checking out. Talking about bands that were just kind of hanging around or maybe giving a resurgence. The band Styx released a new album in 2003 called Cyclorama. It was not necessarily a commercial success. Did have a couple of good songs on there. I enjoyed it, but I know it didn't really chart very well, which is kind of a shame. But yeah, that came out in 2003. Faceless from Godsmack came out in 2003, which included I Stand Alone, Straight Outta Line, Serenity Realign. Solid release from those guys. Burning Down the Opera, the live album from Ed Guy in 2003. I mean, this is all great. Like both CDs, definitely worth checking out. Those guys obviously are awesome. Mika Nakashima released Love in 2003. That included the song Find the Way, which was used in Gundam Seed. Definitely a good release from her. Another one that doesn't necessarily have any hits on it, but worth mentioning, the album Kimi Tsunagi 5M is the first studio album from the Japanese rock band Asian Kung Fu Generation, released in 2003. These guys are about to take off when we get to 2004 when they release their next album, Solfa, which is going to include rewrites, and that kind of took them into a different stratosphere once that song came out. Meteora, the second studio album from Linkin Park, came out in 2003, which included Somewhere I Belong, Faint, Numb, From the Inside. Again, another big album from those guys. One other honorable mention, Fallen from the band Evanescence, came out in 2003. That was their debut studio album, which of course included Bring Me to Life, which was huge and everywhere in 2003. But, again, we're going to fall back on the bands that I became big fans of because of these albums that came out around this time. And we're going to go back to Sonata Arctica again. Winter Hearts Guild came out on February 21st, 2003. Loudwire named the album number 11 in the list of the top 25 power metal albums of all time. Metal Hammer also included in their 2016 list of the 10 essential power metal albums. As you pointed out to me today, the Sonata Arctica subreddit had it as the best album ever. If you have to pick an album that kind of sums up early Sonata Arctica, this is probably a pretty good one to give somebody. It's an awesome album from start to finish. I love when these songs come up on my iPod even today. it's funny because All Music gave it a 2 out of 5.
Ouch.
Yeah, despite the fact that everybody's talking about this being one of the greatest power metal albums, and All Music hated it, but you can't please those people. The tracks are just great. Starts out with Abandon, Please, Brainwashed, Exploited, then Graven Image, The Cage, Silver Tongue, The Misery, Victoria's Secret, Champagne Bath, Broken. The Rest of the Sun Belongs to Me was a Japanese edition bonus track.
Great song.
A great song. The Ruins of My Life, and then another Japanese track that was different on the Japanese version, Draw Me, which has a little bit altered release. But again, and these guys are going to come up again because next year's Reckoning Night, so we'll definitely be talking about them again in 2004. But these guys are just on a run right now where they were really at the top of their game, and it's great to see them continuing to produce great music even today. But it was this stretch of albums that made a lot of fans that are probably fans forever of Sonata Arctica. And if you're looking to find a way to get in the door with these guys, this is a pretty good place to start. Mike, obviously a longtime fan of Sonata Arctica, got me into this band. Your thoughts on Winter Hearts Guild?
I was kind of looking at All Music now just to see
what
exactly happened there. But the ads are so egregious. What in the world? Yeah, I only see, unless I'm just missing it, page 1 of 1. I only see 2 user reviews, one giving it a 1.5 and another one giving it 5.
Well, that's interesting. There's the All Music rating, but they want me to disable my ad blocker, which is not going to happen.
Shocking. I wanted to see kind of a write-up on it from their website. I mean, here's a review from Andy Hines. That is the All Music review.
Yeah.
Third full-length effort from Sonata Arctica features 10 characteristically cinematic performances bolstered by the band's dependably workmanlike progressive power metal chops. Tony Kakko's soaring soprano leads the way, followed by the blazing neoclassical improvisations of keyboardist Jens Johansson. Amazingly, a guitar solo does not appear until the 3rd track. But that's it. That's the review.
I got 2 out of 5. Like, it sounded like he was liking it there for a while.
Yeah, I was really confused. One of the users, the one who gave it a 1.5, kind of points out that to them it feels like a replica of the first 2 albums. Maybe it's a similar style. One thing I did think about when I was listening to this again and thinking that the next album would be 2004's Reckoning Night is like, I do feel like this is kind of an end of a certain sound of theirs.
Yeah.
When you move into Reckoning Night, I feel like that's when you kind of get that transition into more of what their modern sound is like. Things feel a little more mid-tempo on this album as opposed to Winter Hearts Guild, where it's still just like the ultra-speed power metal.
You don't want to say sellout because that has this negative connotation, but it kind of feels like when you get to Reckoning Night, and we'll talk more about this next week for sure, you start getting songs that feel like they could be radio tracks, where the previous albums were kind of for the hardcore fans of power metal. Like this, you look at, a song like Ain't Your Fairy Tale, Don't Say a Word, Blinded No More. Like these are songs that are a little more normal, I guess. Like just more rock songs, maybe.
Yeah, and I don't know how things work in Finland if they actually are radio hits. I just wonder if it wasn't a matter of, man, let's try something a little different finally. Let's slow it down a bit. Clearly, I think there were some progressive elements that Tony wanted to pursue that you see kind of moving forward in some of their tracks, and I love Ecliptica, Silence, and Winter Hearts Guild.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like they needed to keep sounding like that to a T.
Yeah.
I think looking at Reckoning Night and kind of moving on from there, Unia, I love. Days of Grace, that was totally off the other end of the spectrum, and I love that album. So, yeah, I see nothing wrong with either products. Kind of going back to Winter's Heart Guild, Silver Tongue is probably still one of my favorite songs of theirs. Just tremendous. Whole album's great.
Well, for the record, All Music gave Reckoning Night 4.5 stars out of 5. So maybe they took that criticism to heart. Like maybe,
makes you wonder.
Maybe they decided they wanted to not make an album that sounded the same because it's definitely different.
Go back now and look at that one.
But it's again, if you're looking to kind of get into the early sound of the band, this or the previous two albums, as we mentioned, are a good place to start. And then there's a lot of great stuff to come, obviously. And when you mentioned progressive, there's no doubt that Tony Kakko has a mind that allows them to go in some places that a lot of other bands might not have gone, and some people may or may not have liked it. I liked a lot of the crazy places they went. It's not popular with everybody, but to me, that's always made them fun, because when you see them in concert, maybe more so than a lot of bands we see, fun appears to be at the top of their list. These guys like to have a good time, and I think that kind of carries over into their songwriting and song creation, that they want the stuff to be fun for them and be fun for the listeners, and I think that's what's made them so great for so many years.
Man, the review of Reckoning Night is longer, at the very least. As much as they qualify for all the negative, read repetitive, stereotypes of melodic European power metal, Finland Sonata Arctica somehow managed to suppress the cheese factor to a point where fans of more challenging and aggressive heavy metal can actually stomach their albums. 2005's Reckoning Night is one such triumph, and although the precise reasons behind this remain as inexplicable as ever, possibly Tony Kakko's more than honest operatic delivery, the fact is, not only does it prove surprisingly likable for power metal haters, it naturally qualifies as potentially genre-topping stuff for power metal lovers.
Oh, wow.
A different reviewer. This guy put some work into it.
Also, if there's not a Bandcamp band out there called Cheese Factor, I don't know what we're doing. Like, to me, that just seems like a no-brainer choice, But yeah, definitely check those guys out. Obviously, Winter Hearts Guild qualifies for 2003, so that is why it is my pick. But, of course, I will always miss some albums because there are so many, and it was just an interesting time in 2003. Another one of those kind of crossover years where you have bands continuing to release stuff, coming back and releasing things, and maybe starting up. So what did I miss, Mike?
Yeah, there was a lot of good, popular, questionable stuff that came out that year. See if I can kind of hit every possible angle. We did have the debut for Masterplan, released in 2003. Band formed by Roland Grappo and Uli Kusch for Leaving Halloween. Had Jorn Land on vocals. Really good stuff. One of the first albums from this band that really got me into the band was Sing the Sorrow by AFI. More of like a emo kind of sound compared to kind of the horror punk and then previous like hardcore punk they used to do. Songs like Leaving Song Part 1 and 2, Silver and Cold, Girls Not Grey, Paper Airplanes, The Celluloid Dream. Also worth noting that CM Punk for a while did use the opening track from this album, Miseria Cantare, the beginning, as his entrance theme back in the old days. Catatonia, Viva Emptiness. I mentioned this one only because for a while it would always play on the Pandora station that you had set based on the band Sentenced. So I remember back in the old karate school days hearing the song Inside the City of Glass, which was an instrumental and just really downtrodden. Good stuff, but definitely a thing. Hymns Love Metal came out in 2003. Probably his best album, I would say, or their best album. Tracks like Buried Alive by Love, The Funeral of Hearts, Soul on Fire, This Fortress of Tears, Endless Dark, The Path. Just great album front to back. Kind of going to more thrash metal. We have Anthrax's We've Come For You All that came out. I remember this album coming out kind of post the whole, are they going to have to change their name post 9/11 and all of the Anthrax scares, and they made this big defiant push like, hey, we're not changing our name. This was, I believe, the last original studio album that featured John Bush on vocals. Had tracks like What Doesn't Die, Safe Home, Cadillac Rock Box, We've Come For You All. Dimebag Darrell guests on 2 of the tracks, and weirdly enough, I found out, I didn't even realize this, Roger Daltrey appears on one of the tracks. Not something you'd really expect.
Yeah.
Weird Al's Poodle Hat came out.
Yep.
Just have to mention Hardware Store, still one of my favorite original Weird Al tracks.
That is great.
Great album, great song. Halloween's Rabbit Don't Come Easy came out as well. Very strange title, not unlike Halloween at this point. But great album. Songs like Just a Little Sign, The Tune, Never Be a Star, Back Against the Wall. Metallica, Saint Anger.
I wasn't going to mention it. I was like, well, will Mike mention Saint Anger or not? And
I had to mention it just because I remember how big of a deal it was. I remember the day that MTV was hyping that they were going to premiere the video for Saint Anger, and watching it as it premiered and thinking, the idea of this video is pretty cool. They're at this prison, playing in front of the inmates. I don't really know what's going on with the song though. Like I didn't hate it, but it was like, what are they doing there? What is this? And then later you'd get a hold of the rest of the album and realize they had just entirely lost their minds. Worth mentioning, though, in 2015, Daryl Gardner and Dave Cox re-recorded the album, and it's on YouTube with Daryl playing the instruments and Dave singing. It was kind of meant to just redo the album in a more conventional way and sound. They didn't add guitar solos, but they made the drums sound like drums. But yeah, you can find it on YouTube. It's definitely worth listening to kind of find out what it would have sounded like if they just didn't have to go totally crazy on it. Let's see. Brand New's second album, Deha and Tandu, came out. Probably one of the best emo albums of all time if you're into that sort of thing. Turns out later on we found out that the lead singer was a pretty sketchy dude with multiple sexual assault allegations popping up. Weirdly enough, though, if you listen to that album, you probably would have saw the warning signs because some of the lyrics, man, you think this dude must be a horrible human being. I don't know if that's just how he wrote these songs or if that's really him. But that being said, they win the award for most absurd like emo song titles because that was a thing for a while where you had to have kind of the light novel anime titles to your songs. Standout tracks on that one include Sick Transit Gloria, Glory Fades, I Will Play My Game Beneath the Spinlight, Okay, I Believe You, But My Tommy Gun Don't, The Quiet Things That No One Ever Knows, and Me versus Maradona versus Elvis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on, one that I only know because of my time in a past life working at Blockbuster, the band Vendetta Red had an album called Between the Never and the Now. They had the song on that album called Shatterday. I don't know what that means. I don't want to know. But it used to play on, it was like a month worth of our trailers we had to watch, and that video played, and it just got buried in my head, and I can't get it out. So yeah, check out Vendetta Red's Shatterday. Continuing on, there was a lot from this year.
It was a wild year, and I tried to narrow my picks down because I knew there was a bunch you were going to get to.
We haven't reached like the hour and a half point yet, so I figure, let's run with it. 2003 also saw the release of Queensryche's album Tribe. In the midst of working on that album, they brought in Chris DeGarmo, who agreed to help them with some guitar parts and some writing. I guess the record label kind of issued a statement suggesting he was rejoining the band, maybe to try to like boost sales, but that was evidently not ever going to be a thing.
Yikes.
But a good album for that era of Queensryche. Tracks like Open, Losing Myself, Falling Behind, Tribe, Blood. Let's see. One of the last ones I need to mention too is Skid Row's Thick Skin. Probably my favorite work of theirs in the post-Sebastian Bach era. You had Johnny Solinger on lead vocals, and he did fine singing. Also featured Saigon Kick's Phil Verone on the drums. Just kind of it wasn't classic Skid Row. Like it definitely seemed like they were trying to get a little more of a modern rock sound, and it worked here. Tracks like Ghost, Swallow Me, Born a Beggar, Lamb, Mouth of Voodoo.
Born a Beggar is a great song.
Yeah, the album had quite a few really good songs. One other one that isn't really my style, but I think has to be mentioned, Outkast's Speaker Box, The Love Below came out.
Yeah.
Double album. Not something I'm super into, but everyone loved the songs Hey Ya, Roses, The Way You Move. Those were just ungodly hits, so you can't not bring it up.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't really necessarily fit in what I look for, but like it was incredibly popular.
Yeah.
And kind of set where that type of music was going to go over the mid 2000s, where you had like these crossover. It's kind of like crossover hip hop rock music, basically.
Yeah.
And those guys did it about as well as anybody did in that time period. So yeah, great album for sure. But a lot of great stuff from 2003, and I'm sure as we continue on, it will also be crazy as we move to 2004. Next week, but it is time to bring this podcast to a close for another Sunday night. Great to have you along with us again for another episode of Music Weekly. We had some great music for October the 25th. I definitely encourage you to go back and check out Mike's playlist. We have the link wherever you need to get it, but there was just a lot of great music this week, and we couldn't get to all of it. But I guarantee there's something for everybody this week, so definitely check that out. Again, no midweek podcast this week. We'll be back next Sunday for another episode of Music Weekly. It'll be the music of November the 1st coming up next week. Looking forward to that. And, of course, then we'll kind of get back as my schedule normalizes. We'll start to get back into a little more regular. And we'll have a wrestling podcast here before too long, too, because it's been far too long. We need to check in with Rachel, make sure she's still alive, and get her on for some wrestling takes as we get towards Survivor Series War Games, which is coming up here in just a couple weeks. Big thanks to Stove Lake Media for their continued support of the podcast. Big thanks to Mike for putting this episode together with all the music. Big thanks to Chris for holding down the chat, and a big thanks to you, the listener, wherever and whenever you're listening to our podcast. That's going to wrap things up for this week. For Mike and Chris and the entire group, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.